right. And we are live with Roxanne Derhodge. Roxanne, thank you for joining us. You have been such an interesting new friend of mine. And we just recently did a panel together with some incredible leaders. And I've been learning more about you and, your background as a psychotherapist and all the degrees you have and all the things you've done. And then recently, in fact, I think it's just coming out now, you've got a new book out on the return on relationships, which couldn't be a more relevant topic for leaders and folks in IT, particularly as we're trying to invest in new relationships and understand how to connect with different people, different personas, different interests. So thank you for joining. I'm so excited to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk to your group and hopefully impart some kind of perspective that might enable them to connect a little bit quicker, or maybe in a different way from how they generally think about relationships.
And, I think for so many people who know me personally or watch the lives, they know how much I enjoy the science behind all of this and the ROI. If you've watched anything of mine or read anything of mine, you know that I'm often talking about this isn't just a feel good. There's a real return to the business side of things when we look at relationships differently, when we invest in relationships differently, and even when we're making new relationships. How do we do that in a way, to your point, that maybe is quicker, maybe is a little bit deeper, or relates to what that person needs or is interested in? So you're solving problems for these kinds of new relationships and new connections. So before we dive in, for those who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I live in Niagara Falls, Canada. I have a grown son, and I've been here, goodness, for over 30 years. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago. I moved to Canada as a foreign student and entered the field of psychology quite young, finishing with my first designation as young as 21. So started kind of really frontline in the eye of the storm, dealing with people with the Metro Toronto Police as a first responder trauma therapist. And, from that point on, just kind of got into the field in every realm to the point where I ended up in consulting, working with strategy for companies with health and wellness, which ultimately the number one metric that was tracked about what might keep people away from work was relationships. 65% of the people that would seek services were generally related to relationships, either at home or at work.
Wow. Now that's interesting. I did not know that. Very interesting. And I want to dive into some of that too, because I think, to your point, it affects the businesses in ways that we don't even realize. I mean, you and I have talked several times and I didn't even realize that piece. So that's very interesting. And maybe that's a good way to segue into one of my hot topics. Something that we get pulled into a lot is helping enable teams to make new connections and to speak in more business relevant ways, to take technology and now shape it in a way that drives a business solution or resolves a business problem and drives a better outcome or experience for their customers and clients. So there's a lot of shift going on, as you can imagine, accelerated by COVID, but by no means the only thing accelerating this. So maybe let's start with the baseline. When we're making these new connections, when we're going through these transformations, what's happening from like a neuroscience perspective? What does that look like?
Well, there's so many things going on, but ultimately what we're doing is we're reading, right? They talk about making an impression immediately. So, there are things called, your body system is reading mine. So immediately when you see me, those connections are trying to start to trigger, like, okay, does she seem likable? She may be a bit different. What is it? If I'm frowning a certain way, is it that I'm unhappy with you? So in milliseconds, we're really potentially trying to decipher, is Roxanne a safe enough person psychologically for me to be open to? Now, people often say, well, it's not a big ask immediately, but ultimately, we're in tune with our body, and our body holds all emotions. So immediately we're feeling, right? So people go, well, am I feeling? Absolutely, we're feeling. You may not be aware, but your body's kind of your mirror neurons in you, Sabrina, even though we physically not met, have kind of aligned with mine. You're kind of getting a sense of me. My system is reading yours, and we're calibrating at the first point of contact. So it's so very important that when you're thinking about whether it's a stakeholder meeting or a team meeting, or maybe there's a contentious part of the business unit, what space are you coming in with? How are your thoughts before you're going in? Are you thinking, my goodness, we're in trouble? Are you potentially thinking, there's no way out of this? Am I thinking about some team members that have maybe misaligned, and that's kind of impacting my trajectory ending into a meeting? So you become the vein that enters that space, and it's about thinking about it. It's like an X-ray. If you think about an X-ray, what are we doing? We're kind of looking at all the parts of the system. Ultimately, you as a human being, you're being read by each and every one of those people in that meeting, or even if it's one-to-one.
So that's very interesting. I love this concept of mirror neurons, and there's a lot of research behind what athletes do to activate that, to, accelerate their performance, and how that relates to business. And I want to know, does that apply in sort of this IT space and this IT market, particularly when you're making maybe new relationships within an organization? Or is it just something that maybe exists when you're making new relationships face to face?
I think it's relationship period, right? So even if you think about our communication today, a lot of times people are maybe not meeting in person, or maybe they're back and forth. If you're working on a project, you're on Slack, you're on a different interface. But even the way you enunciate in a text says something. The way you say hello, right, on your telephone, right? Is it that you're like, hello? Or it's, hello, how are you today, Sabrina? And it's so nice to hear your voice again. We are consistently communicating. So whether it's a one-time, one-off part of a chain that needs to work together, we are ultimately still reading that person's essence from what's coming across. So whether it's a new relationship or a relationship that's ongoing, there's always that sense of, is this person, can I risk a little bit more each time? And when things aren't going well, sorry, how is it that person approaches this? Are they abrupt? Are they able to say, well, Roxanne, I'm not really able to see that perspective? How do they interface with me? Because in our brain, what happens is our brain does not know the difference between us coming on today to right now. We are the only ones that can really keep the brain and the body present. So if I'm reacting, let's say maybe your voice gets louder when you're stressed, that's going to trigger me back potentially. Let's say I had an experience with other people in senior leadership positions that were not ideally nice when they were stressed. My body and my brain is going to take me. I call it stickiness with memory, and it's going to go boom, 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 and it's going to go back to every time. And it's accumulating in that present moment. If I'm not able to be aware and cognizant that that's happening, I'm going to get lost. And so the skill that is taught in neuroscience is something called dual processing. Something is happening. I am making meaning to what's occurring in that event. And my body and my brain is going click, 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 click. And then I'm like, how did I lose that time? And where am I now? Oh, gee goodness, I'm going back to this time and this time and this time. And it's the capacity of the individual or the communicator to recognize, oh, I'm no longer present. What is it that I can do? Because I've been lost for a minute there, or maybe a half a minute, to bring myself back to the present, to recognize that's an old narrative. It is no longer relevant in this time. How is it that I'm going to keep myself present to be able to deliver what the person in front of me needs at this perspective? It's a lot of moving parts.
And I think, to your point, some of those folks, and we've all been in those meetings where maybe it's going awry, especially when it's real technical and they're in anything but shop and you're proposing a solution or whatever it might be. So the real talented folks, we've seen them sort of be able to adjust right at the moment and be able to regain trust in such a respectful and artful way. For those of us, maybe me included, who could use some help and some growth in that area, what can we tactically do? Are there resources? Are there, I don't know, routines, practices, things that we can do to sharpen that skill?
Well, I think it's introspection ultimately. For us, I think until
Interesting.
the day we die, we should be continuing to enhance our capacity to connect and communicate. And I know with all the stuff that you talk about, you completely believe in this. So one thing I would say to your listeners right now is to think, when I'm stressed, how do I present? Am I a bit more hyper? Do I kind of fidget, move around? Or am I the type that gets a little bit more frozen, quite
Mm,
literally? Or do I vacillate between both?
mm,
If you are the type that's hyper, at that point, you're going to be thinking, if I'm lost in a thought or a narrative based on who's in front of me, what could I do right now to center myself through breath, for instance, which is really, really quick. So you might just take your hand, put it on your lower abdomen, and take a couple of breaths so you elongate your breath to bring you back to the center. If you're the
interesting.
type that gets frozen, get up and move around a little bit. Just get up. Maybe, if you're the head of the table in the meeting, maybe walk to the side, because what's happening is the brain and the body is trying to take you back to a place of familiarity, which may not be comfortable because it may be based on erroneous messages based on what the body's triggering to you at that point. To stay present, you might say, right now I'm kind of lost in my thoughts. My instinct is, my tummy's a little bit heavy. I'm not present anymore. I'm kind of getting frozen in my thinking or my feelings, and my body physiologically get up and move. What will happen is then the body gets different options. The body doesn't think, I'm going to get really, really upset and maybe emote in a way that's less likely to, bring me back to center. The brain now knows, well, I'm centered in my body. I'm okay. I'm fine. That person is maybe a little bit abrupt,
Yeah.
but it doesn't mean
Yeah.
they really don't have the best interest at heart. But so it's kind of knowing, and it's called the window of tolerance, which is a fancy neuroscience word for relaxed state. And if you are able to understand that space within yourself, Sabrina, you're able to
Mhm.
kind of recognize it, because you go, oh, there I go again.
Wait a
I'm
minute.
kind of going
Mhm,
off. Okay, what
mhm.
can I do? What can I do? And I think a lot of times that's what I do with CEOs or C-suite, is kind of, what is your internal stress signature? How do you know that you're tipping out of the window of tolerance? And sometimes that begets another conversation where people go, I have no idea. So you have
Right.
to kind of start at a baseline. And then when they get to the point where they're doing more work, they're able to say, oh, when I start to think like blah, oh, I'm starting to tip out. When I'm starting to kind of feel a little bit, my hands are getting a little bit cold. I can feel, the little bit of tenseness happening. It's showing me that I'm starting to pop out. So
Yeah.
that becomes almost like their tethering spot to say, what can I do to bring myself back in? Because now I have to stay focused. I've got 25 minutes to deliver this message. We've got to get through this technical problem. These teams are all calling in from, east to west coast. We're probably not going to have a time like this again for a little
Right.
bit. We need to address it because we can't lose the time. And that's why it becomes really, really important, if it's interactions or leaders leading meetings, or that they get a hold of that. And that's a lot of what I talk about in the book.
That's very interesting. And I think I can imagine that it would make you even more responsive and be able to think more clearly when you're able to control that. Is it maybe the amygdala that's triggered, right? And then you're
Absolutely.
not
Yeah,
at fight or flight
absolutely.
or,
Yeah, so
freeze?
I always say it's like the three parts of the brain, right? The front part, which I call the CEO of the brain. We want to keep him or her at work all the time. The middle part is the emotional or the limbic part of the brain. And the back part is the reptilian, where the amygdala or maglia sits. So what happens is something happens. The CEO says, too much for me to function right now. I'm offline. The
Yeah.
middle part of the brain is where all the triggers happen, and then it pours adrenaline and cortisol to go into fight, flight, or freeze
Mhm.
for all of
Mhm.
us. We're all
Mhm.
wired, but the way we would present would come across as differently. So again, that's in constant state. You're in
Mhm.
flux. So once you kind of start to recognize it and address it and remind the brain, hey, this is no biggie.
Right.
I can address this. You get
Right.
better at it. So you're actually not growing things that would have triggered you, maybe that were less than ideal in the past, or maybe if you're the type that gets anxious and worried about the future, the more you vacillate either to the past or the future, you're growing those states. ultimately we want you to stay in the middle. And the more that you're in the middle, then the brain goes, oh, Roxanne can, take a really nice cold drink. That brings her back. Roxanne's able to write down her thought really quickly, which makes her thoughts more objective. She's got options versus going back to the old kind of space that made her feel quote unquote comfortable, but maybe it wasn't effective to have coped with a less than ideal scenario.
And all of a sudden, then by doing this multiple times, you're creating new habits. So your brain fires these little, neurons, little fire in new pathways to go, oh, I don't have to freeze. I can, if I get up and do this, I've got these other options to your point. And I can imagine, so please correct me if I'm wrong, you're the expert. But I imagine that these mirror neurons that you were talking about earlier are now firing in the person who's receiving the message or meeting with you or building a relationship with you or considering about building a relationship with you. Now they're sort of ideally, or at least in part, feeling some of that calm or some of that confidence or whatever that you're coming. Is that fair? Is that how mirror neurons work, or not even close?
Absolutely. And I will go, sometimes when I meet with people in person and they're anxious, right? And they'll say to me sometimes when they're pulling up to my office, physiologically, there's a shift when they pull in to where my office is, and they'll go, something happens. And I go, well, tell me more. So what's happening is, because now the brain and the body is accustomed, they might come up this high. And when they come in, I'm centering them,
Right.
knowingly or unknowingly to that space. So they're calibrating when they come into the space, because now their brain and body is remembering that's the state that they get into. And they go, what is it that happens? I said, that's the body and the brain finding the space that makes you feel really, really comfortable to be able to open up and be vulnerable. And really, if you think about it, it's not like, not unlike, when we're kind of young and we're, let's say we're new to school or we're trying to make a new little friend when we're young. If you look at children, right? I look at my son and they would kind of look at somebody side eye and then they would like, oh, they're playing football, so maybe I can go join it. We're bigger versions of those small people, right? Yeah. And we put them into meetings or boardrooms, and we're also trying to calibrate and find that place of centering, whether you're the leader, which, they obviously are the one in the charge, but the people around the room are also going through their narrative about potentially how are you connecting to them? And if you're able to get within yourself, that's a gift that you give yourself, but ultimately you're giving others.
Interesting. I mean, this is just so fascinating to me. And, in business, we hear a lot of times, the quote, people don't remember what you say. They remember how you made them feel. This is the science behind that. And so for me, I love these kinds of moments where you see a connection behind science and what we know to be true, but we don't understand maybe the workings or inner workings of it. Because certainly we all have, people that we interact with that either bring us up or bring us down or make us happier, or, can influence our moods. And this is why. And this is one of the key components, I think, to building steady, long-term, deep relationships is understanding how a lot of these things work. So you touched on something earlier about, a lot of communication now is remote or virtual. And a lot of times starts an email or on LinkedIn or, some kind of platform that isn't face-to-face or maybe over a phone call. So do you have any guidance for how do you start to build relationships there when maybe somebody can't see my, my behavior, or they can't hear my tonality? What do you do then? Is there something that you can do to help maybe initially build a relationship and build trust, credibility there?
I think the state that if you're going to meet someone face to face, let's say eventually that's what wanting to do. Remember that even your words and the syntax and the context of a message could be, Sabrina, confirmed 10 o'clock Monday. Could be, hey, Sabrina, how's it going? It's pretty sunny here today. Finally, we got some great weather. Can't wait to be able to sit on, on my back porch again, pulling out the furniture on the weekend. Hope you're in a part of the country that's a possibility for you this weekend. Just wanted to connect about that project. I know we left it at blah, blah, blah. Things aren't going so well. Just wondering if are there some next steps, or do you have some perspective that can help me on my end? The difference between those two is I am taking the time to connect. Who is Roxanne? A little bit about me, a little bit about what I'm into, and what are you about? So I'm engaging. So it's commend, then request. Because what happens is most of us in business, we think, if we were to walk into an environment which physically would go, hey, Sabrina, so nice to see you. How have things been? How are the kids? Or whatever we talk about. How was that? How was that vacation and staycation you had the other day? We do that more naturally in person. So online, we're starting needing now to think, where is that space? You have to be able to create that space so that people feel comfortable enough. Like, who is she? Is she just about the project, or what's going well or not going well? Because we know the rapidity of productivity today is getting that much more, and a lot of people are more stressed, and recession, and geopolitical things. There's a lot going on, right? What do all of us need to know? We just need to be able to have that human to human connection. So that's what I would often say. How is it that I might try to think about, if I wanted Sabrina to get to know me, what might I want her to experience? And then we get into the business of work.
So way back in the day, we used to call this a backwards chain when I was more focused, and we use it in enablement all the time, where you go, okay, what do I want? What behavior am I trying to get this person to do? And then you work your way backwards, and you maybe start with heavy prompting on the front end, and then leave that last task for them to do on their own. And then they master that, and then you kind of work your way backwards. It almost feels like that. What do I want them to feel? And then work your way backwards. And you said something that I cannot stress enough, is probably one of the most important things that I've learned in my career. And to be very, very honest, I stole this from Warren Buffett, and it's been a game changer for me. And I've had so many coaches work on me and work with me on this. So is that words matter. Words matter. And you hit it right on the head. Is how am I going to feel connected to you? And yes, business matters. We have to get right to the business. I get that. And the way I find a happy medium is I try to be extremely clear in the subject. So somebody knows. You will see many of my emails say, need your guidance, need your perspective. So my thought is, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, is that if I'm honest, if I'm clear, that's kind. And you can build a trust. Then Sabrina's not going to play any games. If she needs your guidance and she doesn't know the right way to approach this, I'm going to come and ask you. And then there's the connection top piece that you talked about. So then it's the subject line is, hey, this is exactly what I need. I need your guidance. I need your perspective. I need your direction. And then I'll go into, hey, isn't it great? That game last night was awesome. Did you see what, so-and-so did, and go Bulls, right, or whatever it might be, and then go into the ask. So that's what I've noticed, where you can build that trust in written communication, which doesn't always, I think, appear obvious, that you can build trust, you can build credibility in written communication. It doesn't have to only be a video call or an in-person or something like that, where they can see your behavior or hear your tone or anything like that. And that's something that I've learned in part from you. And like I said, some of these other mentors and coaches that I've worked with over the years.
Build the capacity to get the invitation to connect, right? So, don't assume that everybody's going to be like you. Don't assume that everybody wants to get on a video call, but because not everybody does, because they're still like, okay, what do you want from me? Kind of thing.
Right.
It's like the people that come to the LinkedIn, and the first thing is say, hey, I've got this. And I think that's, I get those reach outs all the time.
Every day.
At Forbes, I'm sure and I'm like, do you know anything about my capacity, what I do there, anything at all? And now you're trying to pitch me for something. If that person took the time to even, somebody reached out to me the other day, and on my profile on my website, as a child, they call me Chatterbox, right? Because I was a middle child of 6 children. Okay. I was a chatterbox. So this person took the time, they went to my website, they read my kind of background, and he says, I wonder what it takes to become a chatterbox today, seeing that communication is so off and most of us aren't getting on. So again, I thought, well, that's brilliant. First of all, he's tapping into, and I'm going to hear chatterbox, and I'm going to be really connected. He took the time, and then he was playful with it in reference to how he engaged me. We did not talk about business probably for the first 3 or 4 interchanges, and then it became natural. So I think that we can learn about some of those basics about when we were in person, and think. I often think, and this is what I do in my book with a lot of people, I think When you're around someone and you feel really, really in alignment, that is your teacher.
Yeah.
Really, really spend time and reflect and deconstruct what is happening for you that allows you to feel so safe and psychologically capable of doing all those things. And on the counter side of this, think of someone that makes you feel unsteady
Hmm.
and think, okay, how is it that I react to the really, really stable person? And how
Right.
is it that I react to the unstable kind of connection? Because the unstable person is actually going to give you more information about the areas that you need to enhance in order to connect better. Because you're going to get, not everybody's going to be like you. We all like to play with those people that are the same like us and expressive and,
Completely.
based
Right.
on introvert, extrovert, all those things. However, if you think about your people in IT and the different sectors, you know, how many personalities are you going to get
Right.
on a
Right.
project,
Right.
right? So you need to understand what is it that they're needing from you in order to move things along. So what is it in your capacity and how are you going to synthesize that information in order for them to feel like you're giving them what they need? And if you're off the mark, you got to call it.
Right. Right.
Right? And
Mhm.
say, I feel like we're not on the same page. Help me understand, what am I missing here? Because I know
Mm.
you have valuable information and we seem to kind of not be on the same level here. And I
Right.
want to understand because I know we're going to be doing a lot more work together.
Right.
And then, that ability to be vulnerable also is a
Yes.
great learning tool.
Like I mean, the example you just gave, we could unpack that. Just saying, help me understand. Little changes in your language like that to say, I'd like to understand. It's the kindest way to say, I don't get it. But to your point, you have to be very vulnerable and comfortable to say, I don't get it, and I need your help. And that's a whole nother skill. So I know we're way over, and I could talk about this forever. I would love to have you back. But before we go, if you could hold up your new book and tell people where can they get it and give us just a blurb about it. Yeah, hold it up. I would love to see it. ROR, Return on Relationships. Tell us real quick, where can they get it? Because I think it's just about to launch. Is that right? Are you
Yes, you can go to my website to roxannederhodge.com/book. You can sign up for the pre-launch. It's in pre-launch. It will be available at the actual launch, but we're pre-launching now, so people can buy it, and then it'll be delivered on the 10th of June. And so it's roxannederhodge.com/book. What that will take you, it'll give you a narrative about the book. The book has 5 areas of enhancement that leaders can look at themselves in those capacities, but they can also
Mm,
have their teams be able to do the same assessment. And then they collate what is it that they perceive as being their strengths and their limitations, but what is it that their teams say about them? And ultimately look at if there's incongruence, that's where the gaps in your leadership development might exist, and then from that you can work to kind of enhance those areas. There's a lot in the book. There's a lot of exercises or things that you can actually do. Let's say it's around recognition. You realize, boy, I'm not so good with recognizing others because I'm not so good with it within myself because I'm off to the
right.
thing and the thing. Then it helps you to kind of slow down, recognize, take the actual steps that you can start to enhance that capacity now.
Ah, that's such good stuff. It's so good. Roxanne, thank you so much. This is so fun. And I've learned so much. And like I said, we've talked before. We've talked about this several times now. And I cannot stress enough the value of investing. And I literally, and I encourage my team as well, I put it on my calendar. It says investment block. Find something. You've pointed out a few different tools that we can use now. Then when we get your book on June 10th, we can go through the rest of the tools. So thank you for this. And I highly encourage that, folks listening, take some time to invest. And maybe, that example that you gave of find the person who makes you feel least at ease. They can tell you the most of where you can grow. That's brilliant. That's sheer brilliance. That could take 15, 20 minutes, block it on your calendar and figure some stuff out because these tools apply to business, to your point, return on relationship more now than I think they ever have. So, with that, Roxanne, I can't wait to have you back to unpack even more of this. Congratulations on your new book. I'm so excited to see where you go. What's next for you?
Well, thanks so much. It's been amazing. I think you and I can probably conversate about so many nuances from what came from this conversation today. So thanks again.
Hey, till next time. See you soon. Bye
Take
bye.
care.